Alice, what do you think we should do?
What do I think we should do? Oh, what do I think? I don't know. I mean, maybe I think we should be grateful. Grateful that we've managed to survive through all of our adventures, whether they were real or only a dream.
Are you sure of that?
Am I sure? Only as sure as I am that the reality of one night, let alone that of a lifetime, can ever be the whole truth.
And no dream is ever just a dream.
The important thing is we're awake now, and hopefully for a long time to come.
Forever.
Forever?
Forever.
Let's not use that word. It frightens me. But I do love you. And you know there is something very important we need to do as soon as possible.
What's that?
Fuck. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Tatum.
And I'm Geneva.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. Okay, Geneva, I am very excited to talk about this movie today.
Me too.
After I rewatched it, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely still love this movie.
I put it on too late last night and had to finish up the last 20 minutes right before we stopped filming or started recording. And it's just a masterpiece. It really is.
So good. But before we jump into why we both think this movie is a masterpiece, Geneva, can you please share with us what you've been watching recently?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I watched a few recent, as of the time of this recording, movies. I don't think we have talked yet about Wicked on the podcast. I think that was after we last recorded. Okay, so I saw Wicked.
As did I.
Great. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. I had very low expectations for this, if I'm being completely honest. I didn't really I've seen Wicked on stage a couple of times. Liked it a lot. Really enjoy some of the songs with it. Thought it's a very fun show that has some flaws. And I really wasn't sure how well it was going to translate to the screen. The material and trailers that had come out ahead of time, I was not crazy about.
A bit much.
Yeah. There's
how much money do you think they spent on the marketing campaign for this movie?
Yeah. Well, I feel like they just marched down to whatever marketing agency covered Barbie last year and was like, hey, can we get your playbook? And they were like, sure.
Yep, why not? Give us your money.
Anyway, all that it was to say is I really enjoyed Wicked. I thought it was a good time. The casting I was a little bit nervous about, but it had worked out really well. Ariana Grande, I always forget how talented she is, but she is ridiculously talented. Cynthia Erivo, of course, is also ridiculously talented, as is Jonathan Bailey. I think John Chu does a very good job of generally. Sorry. What are you laughing about?
I'm sorry. It just comes to my brain every once in a while, and every time it makes me laugh so hard. And I feel like in this particular instance, it's very relevant.
What?
The wickedly talented one and only Adele Dazeem. It's so good.
They should have given John Travolta a cameo in Wicked.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine?
And his character's name is Adele Dazeem.
No, it's Adele Dezemius or something.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, yeah, I enjoyed Wicked. I thought it was good. It was fine. Some ways it could have been improved, particularly the cinematography, I think is just very kind of drab and washed out in a way that really detracts from what I think is pretty good choreography and some really great musical staging. But that's okay. It's not the end of the world. So I had a good time. A lot of people I know have seen it in real life and really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really glad that they're happy. So, yeah. Can
I comment real quick on
my
thoughts
please.
of Wicked? I I am not as much of an esteemed film critic about musicals as Geneva is.
Snob,
but
you mean?
I don't know if I'd call you a musical snob. I think it's just your genre. But anyway, yeah. So I went in with also like, I don't think I went in with low expectations, but I kind of was just like moderately, I'm sure it'll be fine. And then I was also pleasantly surprised. For me, on Letterboxd, I really struggled with rating it because, in all honesty, like in terms of storyline and everything, it's a 4-star movie for me. But I was so incredibly impressed by the production design that I was like, I don't know, it's kind of a 4.5-star movie. Like, this is some of the best production design I've seen. In my mind, it was very similar to, in terms of how impressed I was, it was very similar to what I thought of Poor Things last year, as well as Barbie. Obviously a very different vibe, but I just feel like we've had a lot of really great visual production design the last couple years. And so I thought that was absolutely phenomenal. And I really liked the costumes as well. Certain things about the costumes don't make sense to me, but I think they look great. So yeah, I'm glad I saw it. I went with my girlfriend. She's a huge Wicked fan. We had a really good time. I think I had like multiple Wicked songs alternating being stuck in my head for like at least 24 hours afterward. But I enjoyed it. Cynthia Erivo is a goddess. I think Ariana Grande did a very good job as well. It's hard to tell whether she's acting or whether she's just being her, to be honest.
That's how you know it's good, and sometimes not. I don't know.
Yeah.
She's whenever she stars on SNL, like I always forget that she got her start in comedy and in acting and in comedy specifically. Yep. But she's an incredibly talented comedian and a really talented actress too.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. So I enjoyed the movie overall. I had a really good time. It didn't feel long. I was nervous that it would feel long because I was like, the show itself is what, 3.5 to 4 hours, like the Broadway stage show.
Actually, this is really hilarious. The movie, it's what, like 2.5 hours? The show is about 2.5 hours. Well, they took act one of the show and stretched it out as long as the entire show on Broadway.
That's what I was going to say. I was a little bit nervous that it was going to feel long because I was like, how are you going to take something that's this length and spread it out into 2 really long movies? But it worked for me. So there you go.
That's good.
Anyway.
Yeah. I do kind of agree with the people who are saying that Defying Gravity was a little bit of a letdown, not because Cynthia Erivo was not amazing, which she was, but because they really chop up the song and spread it out more than it is in the show. And that deflates a little bit of the, emotional, like, soaringness of it.
Yeah. I would agree with that as well.
Yeah. But,
it's like the momentum of the song, it kind of loses it, and then you have to get back into it, and then it loses it again.
Yeah. But, when she's able to get going, when the momentum is not stopping her, obviously her voice is absolutely incredible. So,
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that was Wicked. And then the same weekend, so I got Wicked. I saw Gladiator Part 2. This, unfortunately, I was very disappointed in. I know Tatum has not seen it yet. I will be very curious for your thoughts when you see it, but
yeah,
I know Paul Mescal is a really great actor, and so
he's not a blockbuster actor. He's not.
Yeah, this is the thing: is it poor casting? Is it poor writing? Or is it just poor acting? It's hard. It's impossible to say exactly where the fault lies because it's all three of those things are a mismatch. It's a character who's not really written to his strengths. He was not the right person to put in that role. And he's just not giving the sort of movie star blockbuster performance that Russell Crowe was able to do in the first one. And this movie so much wants to make Lucius into a Russell Crowe, a Maximus type character. And it just does not work. And it's really disappointing because there are some really great, very fun performances elsewhere in the movie. Denzel Washington being the biggest example. He's wonderful. And then Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger, who play the two villainous emperors, are so much fun. Pedro Pascal is really giving that sort of Russell Crowe, Maximus, noble archetype energy, but he's barely in the movie. And so,
really? I didn't know he was barely in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, barely is an exaggeration, but he's not in the movie very much. The movie sort of starts out with him being the fixation that Paul Mescal's character has. Like, he's like, this is the guy I'm going to go up against. But then he just sort of drops out of the movie for large stretches. And so anyway, there'll be these really fun scenes of all this political machinations and stuff. And then it just stops dead so that Lucius can kind of just sit there and mope about his parentage or whatever.
Or whatever.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have a lot more that I could say about it, but for the sake
let's
of
not
time,
waste our breath on that movie.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a fun movie. It's not like you're gonna go in and not have any fun at all, but it is really disappointing, knowing the source material it's coming from.
So much of me is like, just release the original Gladiator, and I want to go see that in theaters instead.
Oh, that would be really fun. Yeah, they really should have done that. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I also saw a recent movie called Blitz. This is a movie by the director Steve McQueen, starring Saoirse Ronan. It takes place during World War II. It's about a mother who sends her child away, during the London Blitz, the London bombings. She sends him away to be the countryside to be safe, which is a thing that happened in London at this time. But the child is... he doesn't want to leave his mother, and so he ends up escaping the train that's taking him away and returning to London. So basically, most of it takes place over the course of one night, where he's wandering throughout London, getting into various scrapes, meeting different people, trying to find his way back home. And his mom, meanwhile, at first doesn't realize that she's lost, but then when she does realize it, she's out looking for her son. This is a really interesting movie. I wish I liked it a little bit better than I did, because I think it covers such a fascinating aspect of this conflict and this time period that is not covered very much, because specifically Saoirse Ronan's son is mixed race. The man that she had her son with was an immigrant from, I think they say Ghana. I don't completely remember, but he has since been deported. So she's a single mother, and her son, in addition to being a child lost in London, is also having to navigate racism and kind of, figure out how to make his way in the world as a young person who is trying to learn how to defend himself and learn who to look to for safety. And there's just a really interesting story to be told here about, the London Blitz. Like the popular narrative is like, Londoners came together to support one another in the midst of this really trying time. And obviously that is true, and that's shown here, but it's also digging into all of these divisions of this like racial hierarchy and class hierarchy that existed at that time.
Steve McQueen is British, right?
Yes, he is. I shouldn't say that so confidently. I think he is.
Yeah, he's British.
Okay. But anyway, so it's just basically taking this, time period that we have seen depicted a lot and complicating it and digging into side stories that are not usually told. And I think that part is fascinating, but it really does feel like the movie's kind of at war with itself, because it wants to tell this really dark, complicated story. But then at the same time, it's following this child, and a lot of his very episodic adventures are very childlike. Like, there's a whole section that's basically ripped straight from Oliver Twist, where he meets like a band of Cockney thieves who are forcing him to steal stuff for him. And there's a part where he and these little like other runaway boys are like running around on a train, and it feels like the movie can't decide whether it wants to be like a children's story that's telling a simplified story for children, or if it wants to tell a story for adults. And sometimes movies can make that conflict work, but I don't know, this one didn't completely land for me. But it's, obviously Saoirse Ronan is great, as she always is, and it is a really interesting story and perspective. So I would recommend it. I wish it was a little bit stronger than I thought it was. And then the last one that I will mention is a movie from last year called Sometimes I Think About Dying, which is a small indie film starring Daisy Ridley from Star Wars. It takes place in a sort of the Pacific Northwest. Really, really beautiful location with all of these lush trees and the seaside It's a small town. She's an office worker who's very, very introverted, very sort of awkward and reserved. And her coworkers, she works in this sort of small, tight-knit office. Her coworkers are constantly like chatting with each other, getting involved in each other's lives, picking stuff up for one another. And she very much just keeps to herself. And she seems to be kind of a depressive person, and she keeps having these sort of fantasies of herself, like, lying sprawled out in the middle of a forest, dead while her body slowly decays, or on a beach, like on a funeral pyre, like these very beautifully expressive, dramatic, images. It's not like she is fantasizing about like harming herself. It's more just like this idea of like, what will it be when I am dead, sort of a thing, I think. But anyway, a new person comes to work in her office, and he's this really friendly, extroverted person, and he starts intentionally trying to get to know her. And so she's kind of dealing with this idea of like navigating, how do I want to form a relationship with this other person, this friendship? Do I want to open myself up? What does that look like? I thought it was a really, really beautiful little movie. I mean, it is very small. It is very intimate. There's not a whole lot that happens, but it does kind of bring about these sorts of ideas about just what it means to be a person in the world, and especially relating to coworkers, which, I've worked in a lot of office environments. I find that very relatable. That sort of navigating, how much do you want to get involved in your coworker's life versus kind of keep yourself separate. So, I would recommend. Sometimes I think about dying. If you see it somewhere, it's a very, like, again, slow, quiet, vibesy type movie. But I think if you're in the right mood for it, it is really, really beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I'd heard of that movie, or I did and I forgot about it. So,
yeah, I think I had just seen it on maybe like a couple year-end lists and made a little mental note. But I'm very glad that I looked it up. Oh, and then I'll also just mention I rewatched Roman Holiday and I rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Good
Both
movie.
Wonderful, wonderful movies. I won't talk too long about them, but yeah, great movies.
Both great films.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I'm going to go through mine pretty quickly. I've watched a lot of stuff since our last recording. We talked about Wicked already. I was having a bad day, and so I watched this movie called Debs from 2004. Geneva, I think maybe I told you about this, maybe not. It is quite literally the absolute worst movie I've ever seen in my entire life. But the great thing about it is that it is intentionally trying to be the worst movie ever made. So you can kind of just like, again, I was having a really bad day. So this is a movie that you just put on if you like need to watch something terrible to, I don't know, to make you laugh. But anyway, it's called Debs from 2004. It is about these four, like, I think upper teenage girls who are all spies. It's kind of like giving Spy Kids vibes, but like worse than Spy Kids. Like,
I mean, Spy Kids is an American masterpiece. So,
well, it's a great movie. But essentially, there's like this worldwide like assassin or whoever that's like wanted by all of these different organizations, and she comes to America, and these four girls are like, I guess we're supposed to catch her. It's so bad. But basically the lead character, her name is Amy. She ends up, spoiler alert, but like you kind of get it right away. She ends up falling in love with this assassin named Lucy. And then it's like, oh my goodness, like the star spy is now, in a relationship with the assassin, and with the assassin, and what, she's gonna betray us. And then there's all this drama of like, we thought you were the good one. Like it's this whole movie. I wonder what the budget is. It's like an hour and a half. I would say probably 85% of this movie is on a green screen, and it does not need to be at all. It's like you're just sitting in a room, but for some reason you did that on a green screen. Like, why? And it's like so poorly, like they're so poorly cut out. Like it's It is quite, I think it is almost literally the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. But it's stupid, and it was fun to put on when I was just, you know, not necessarily in the best spot. So if you ever want to watch a dumb, like, Spy Kids but worse, like like somewhat sapphic spy movie, like, check out Debs. Anyway, so
wait, Debs, DEBS, as in like debutantes, that sort of thing?
Yes, D period, E period, B period, S period. And I think it stands for whatever their spy organization is.
Of course, yeah.
But I don't remember what it's called. Yes, Geneva and I rewatched Iron Man over a watch party. That was fun. But so Geneva, I remember you talking about this a few months ago. I finally got to watch the movie Femme from last year.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's streaming on Hulu. It is a movie that I am very torn about because, like, the person who wants to shut off my brain and watch a movie loves this movie. I think this movie is very entertaining. It's very, the acting performances are phenomenal. And I think the storyline is very, just very engaging from start to finish. I really enjoyed it on that level. But once I turn my brain on, I think parts of it are very problematic. Because essentially it's about, I mean, I won't go into, because Geneva already talked about it a little bit ago, but just a brief summary. So there is a gay man who is a drag queen, and he gets attacked on the street by a group of, you know, young men. And one of them turns out to be a closeted gay man. And then, whatever, like the gay man, he, blah, blah, blah. So the victim of the attack, he ends up seeing his, the guy who attacked him, like in a sauna or like a steam room somewhere, but he doesn't recognize him because he's not in drag, whatever. And then he's like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, flirt with the guy who beat me up. So then hopefully I can get him in a situation where I can reveal his identity as a gay man to the world. So that way he can kind of lose his street cred and, you know, get revenge for how he was treated. But the two of them end up kind of forming a relationship. And anyway, I really like the movie a lot. But where it gets problematic for me is that the movie tends to focus a lot more on the internalized homophobia of the attacker, as opposed, who is a white man, as opposed to the very real suffering and trauma that this gay black man, like, experienced. And so the fact that that's kind of brushed under the rug for the larger story can be problematic. And I think it is in certain ways. But when I turned my brain off, I really enjoyed the movie a lot. I thought it was very entertaining, and I just liked the path that it took. And I thought the acting performances were great. I liked the score. I thought the cinematography was good. So yeah, that's Femme. I liked it. I would say if you watch this movie, watch it alone. It kind of is in a certain way a porn film that has porn in it.
Yeah.
It's very sexually charged is what I will say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would very lowly recommend watching this with other people, but it's a great film. And then real quick, I watched the movie Thelma from this year, finally, which I know was one of Geneva's favorites.
I loved it so much.
I really enjoyed it. The main weakness for me is the grandson. I think he's obnoxious, and the acting is so weird.
Interesting.
The casting doesn't make sense to me. Like, he just feels like an archetype of a character as opposed to an actual person. Whereas I feel like Thelma and Ben are actual people. So it just was very strange to me. Anyway, so the premise of the movie is there's this old woman named Thelma who is a grandmother, and her family is talking about maybe putting her in a home. Maybe she's getting too old because she was taken advantage of by someone who called on the phone and like claimed to be her grandson needing money because he's in jail, and she gives them money. But she's like, no, I'm going to prove that I'm still a capable woman who doesn't need help. So I'm going to go chase after these people that stole this money from me and get it back. I think it was like $6,000 or something.
10,000, I think. It's somewhere in
Something
that.
like that.
I don't think it clears her out completely, but it's a sizable chunk of change, you know?
Yeah. So it's about her kind of taking her life back, but also like accepting the fact that she is the age that she is and has limits, but also still recognizing that that doesn't mean that her life is over. I think June Squibb is the one who plays Thelma, the titular character. I think her performance is so good. Apparently she did like almost all of her stunts in this movie, which is incredible.
I know.
I love
amazing.
It.
Especially because of the running the running thing about how much she loves watching Tom Cruise movies with her grandson. And so she's the Tom Cruise of the 93-year-old woman set. It's amazing.
It is like it's a Tom Cruise movie, but but with a 93-year-old woman. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Can
I just
lastly,
say?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just to quickly defend my own. I personally love the grandson in the movie, also played by Fred Hetchinger, who I just mentioned is in Gladiator 2. And one of the things I love most about the movie is the relationship between grandmother and grandson, because the way it parallels in the end, where it's like she needs to learn to accept help while also kind of maintaining herself as a person. And so does he. You know, it's like this idea of like different generations have different problems, but these sort of human situations that you find yourself and the way that connecting with one another can help us through it remains universal. And I just found that really sweet. But it's a very
I like
style,
I like the grandson and the purpose of the grandson. I think he's well written. I just hate the acting performance.
I love the acting performance.
I don't think it's because he's a bad actor. I think it's just the decisions that the director made of how they wanted the character to be, which is fine. It just didn't work for me. Anyway, real quick, because we're taking a long time to do this. I watched for the first time the movie Coraline, which is directed by Henry Selick, who also made Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. I've been wanting to see this for a while. It's just one of those movies that keeps falling behind on my list. I finally watched it yesterday. It is a movie that, of course, what an accomplishment. And every time I watch a stop animation film, I'm like, 5 stars. The fact that you guys put in all of this effort, like what in the world? So it is stunning. Like the craft that went into this, the colors are so vivid. And Dakota Fanning gives a really great vocal performance. I liked the movie a lot. I think the last 30 minutes are the weakest part for me, because I feel like Coraline gets into this trap, but then the way that they get her out of it, I feel like is so quickly resolved, and the rules are not really clear. It's just kind of like the premise of the movie is that there's this girl named Coraline, and her parents are legitimately neglectful, and there's this little hidden door in this room of this new house, and it's a door that when she goes through it, it transports her to a duplicate world where she has like other mother, other father, other whatever, and all of them are better versions of her current home, her current parents, all of those things. So she starts to get sucked in by that, and then eventually she gets trapped in that world and realizes that her other mother is actually not well-intentioned. And so then she gets all tangled up in that and everything. So yeah, I think it's a very... I thought it was visually great. I don't regret watching it, but at the same time, the ending really just kind of poo-pooed it for me. And I was like, ugh, this could have ended so much stronger. So I was disappointed in the ending, but everything else leading up to that, I really enjoyed. And then lastly, I need to shout out the television show, the Netflix television show called Arcane, based on, what video game is it? Is it League of Legends?
You told me Mortal Kombat?
It's not Mortal Kombat. I looked it up later and I was like, Tatum, you idiot. It's not Mortal Kombat. Video. Yeah, it's League of Legends. So it's inspired by the video game League of Legends. And it is, they just finished their 2nd season, which is apparently their final season. I thought they were going to have a lot more seasons, but I guess not. It is a show that I think starts out very, very strong. It is a very interesting sci-fi fantasy story about people that live in the top world and then people that live in the undercity, basically people underground and people above ground. And the first season very much so revolves around the conflict between those two different cities. and it's very political, and the characters are great, and the voice performances, it's animated. It's really, really, really a great show. You get into like family trauma and all of those things. Season 2, I'm not going to say it falls apart. I will say that it kind of, it kind of implodes on itself. It keeps adding on so many layers and so many details and so many characters and so much magic. And then it gets into multiverses, and it's just like, okay, this could be really fascinating and very engaging if you spread this out into more seasons. But the fact that you tried to cram all of this into, I think it was like 9 episodes or something, I feel like it was just a little bit too ambitious. I don't think any of the individual ideas were bad, but there were just too many of them, and they didn't dedicate enough time to really flesh them out in ways that they deserved. So season 2, I ultimately found to be very confusing. I'm very versed in like high fantasy world building sorts of like media. And this, I was just like, this doesn't really make that much sense. Like, what are these people's motivations? Why are they doing this? Where did you come from? What's actually happening? Where are you right now? Like, it just got a little bit caught in the weeds. So it's still good. I mean, I still enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it. I'll watch it again, honestly, because I'm thinking maybe there were things I just missed in season 2. So I would highly recommend it. But I think season 1 is far stronger than season 2. But ultimately I just found it disappointing because I felt like there was so much potential for it to be like a Game of Thrones. Not as good, because nothing can be as good, but similar vibes. And then it just kind of, I don't know, let it fall to the wayside in season 2 by just adding so much detail and so many storylines. But anyway, that's Arcane. Check it out. If you are missing just some good fantasy content, it's good. So, yeah, that's Arcane. Anyway, we just spent how much time? Oh, that's actually less time than I thought it was. Okay,
yeah,
only
like
half
an hour. I think that's kind of what we did last time, too.
Yeah, that's pretty standard. For some reason in my brain, that was like an hour. Anyway, okay. So, Geneva, if you are cool with it, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our Eyes Wide Shut portion of the episode.
Do it.
So I'm just letting everyone know right now, this opening summary of the film that I wrote, it's a very long run-on sentence, so bear with me. Also, everything after that is very loosely paraphrased from Wikipedia. So basically almost copied and pasted from Wikipedia. So all credit to the Wikipedia people and the articles that they're linked to.
Yes, thank you, Wikipedia people.
Anyway, so today on the show, we will be discussing Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut. Exploring the idea of sexual fantasy in the midst of a committed long-term marriage, the film follows protagonist Dr. Bill Hartford as he, in the wake of his wife Alice revealing sexual dreams that she has had revolving around a cruise ship worker from years prior, wanders the streets of New York. Over the course of 2 days, Hartford tests his own sexual desires outside of marriage, only to discover more mystery and perhaps even more danger. So, that... Go ahead.
Was it I thought it was a naval officer.
Wasn't it from a cruise ship, though? Weren't they on a cruise ship?
I thought they were in, they had, like, rented a house in, like Cape Cod or something like that.
Oh, really?
I mean, well, this is in no way important.
Wow, I missed it. I thought they were on a cruise ship. Oh, well. I trust you. I'm pretty sure you're probably correct. Anyway,
I'm looking through the quotes now to see if I can verify, but please continue.
Yeah, she has sex dreams about some person that was working
some
somewhere
man
that
has some involvement with a boat.
Yes, some involvement with a boat. Anyway, so Kubrick was first inspired to make this movie when he stumbled upon Arthur Schnitzler's book Dream Story in 1968. And though Kubrick bought the rights to the novel then, he did not actually start working on the project until 1994, when he hired Frederick Raphael to write the script. And when the production was finally approved in 1995 by the then Warner Brothers president Terry Semel, Semel asked Kubrick to cast a movie star, as he hadn't done that since Jack Nicholson in The Shining. So eventually the two lead roles went to Nicole Kidman and her then husband Tom Cruise, after going through a large slew of other potential actors. So principal photography began in November of 1996, and Kubrick's perfectionism led to, I think this is literally a direct quote from Wikipedia. So principal photography began in November 1996. Kubrick's perfectionism led to script pages being rewritten on the set, and he intentionally filmed many scenes multiple times to try to break down the actors involved and have them give a more authentic performance. One scene of Cruise walking through a door was filmed 95 times. As a result, the shoot went on for much longer than expected. The actress Vanessa Shaw, she plays Domino, who's the prostitute. The actress Vanessa Shaw was initially contracted for 2 weeks and one scene, but ended up working for 2 months. Due to the relentless nature of the production, the crew became exhausted and were reported to have been impacted by low morale. Been there, I understand. Cruise actually developed an ulcer, but did not tell Kubrick. And filming finally wrapped in June of 1998. The Guinness World of Records recognized Eyes Wide Shut as the longest constant movie shoot that ran for over 15 months, a period that included an unbroken shoot of 46 weeks.
Question for you. Did you come across in your research, did it run so long because there are a lot of scenes that didn't make the final cut?
I don't think so. I think he just did like a bunch of takes of different scenes, but I could be wrong. But I mean, the fact that one scene of Cruise walking in a door was filmed 95 times, like that's a whole day of shooting right there.
Yeah.
So
who does he think he is? David Fincher?
Yeah, yeah. I love Stanley Kubrick in terms of his movies, but being on his film sets, no, for lots of reasons. So I have a few fun facts that I also found on Wikipedia. So one of them is that after Kubrick bought the rights to the book, he actually considered adapting the book as a sex comedy with a wild and somber streak running through it, starring Steve Martin or Woody Allen in the main role. So that was something that Kubrick considered.
I mean, honestly, Woody Allen, no. Steve Martin, I could see a like dark comedy version of this movie working with someone like Steve Martin in the lead. It would be a very, very different movie. I'm glad we have the version we have now, but I could see something like that.
Yeah. Can you just imagine Stanley Kubrick and Woody Allen being on the same set?
Oh my gosh.
No.
Nope.
Women, run for your lives. Okay, this is another fun fact that I found fascinating. So Cate Blanchett actually this didn't come out until 2019. Cate Blanchett was actually she provided the dubbed voice for the masked woman at the orgy, because apparently the actress who played that woman, her name was Abigail Good, she couldn't perform an American accent in a convincing way, and so they needed someone else to do it. And so Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman suggested Cate Blanchett to dub the voice, and she was dubbed in actually after Kubrick died. So I don't think he ever actually signed off on Cate Blanchett, but I found that to be absolutely fascinating. That is her voice. And she was recommended by Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Wait, I'm so curious how she knew Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
We should call her and ask.
Sure. I've got her on speed dial.
Yeah.
No, because this would have been before The Fellowship of the Ring came out, right?
Before it came out, yes, but I'm pretty sure they were shooting it.
I mean, she's Australian, right? Nicole Kidman's also Australian. Maybe they'd worked together at some point in the past.
Oh, maybe they had. I mean, there's only so many Australian actors, you know?
There's
only like 5 of them.
That's
not
right.
true.
Did you know, fun fact, Nicole Kidman and Naomi Watts were like roommates and like longtime friends before?
That's wild. I always thought they were the same person when I was younger.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember seeing King Kong, and I was like, "That's Nicole Kidman." No, apparently not.
Nope.
I can distinguish between the two of them now, but when I was younger, I
Glad
would get
you
confused.
Glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
You might watch Mulholland Drive, and you're like, man, Nicole Kidman is so good in this movie.
Yeah, she's killing it. Okay, 2 final fun facts. One is that this entire movie was shot in England because Kubrick lived there at the time, and he's apparently scared of flying. So that's fun. And then this last one, this is also a direct quote from Wikipedia. It says, citing contractual obligations to deliver an R rating, Warner Brothers digitally altered the orgy for the film's American release by blocking out graphic sexuality using additional figures to obscure the view in order to avoid an adults-only NC-17 rating that would have limited its financial viability. So
I think that is the version that I watched, that I rented on Amazon, and I have to say, thanks. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know if you can even find the original one anywhere anymore. I looked it up online, and it was like a bunch of people on Reddit being like, where's this movie? And no one gave a satisfying answer. So I don't know if it's even out there. But there has been a lot of discourse online about like certain people who are faithful Kubrick lovers. They're like, if Kubrick hadn't died, he would not have allowed this to be released because he didn't care about those sorts of things. Like A Clockwork Orange, I think, had an NC-17 rating. So people are like, what would this movie have been if he was still alive? Like, I'm like, I mean, it probably would have just been more of an orgy, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, are we really missing anything? The point comes across, but okay.
I feel like there's plenty of nudity in this movie already. But yeah. I don't know. I'm just a American Philistine, so
yeah, I'm like, I'm all for keeping everything in there if it's like adding something to the movie, but I'm like, I don't think we're missing anything by not having more in here. But what do I know?
That's right.
Anyway,
wait, quick question for you about the fact that the film was shot in England. Do you happen to know if the street scenes were filmed using sets like backlot, or were they filmed in like streets in London that could reasonably approximate New York or something
Geneva,
like that?
you are assuming that I did a lot more research than I actually did. Like,
okay, fair enough.
I don't know, man. Like,
I was just so curious because as I was watching it, and I think maybe I subconsciously had heard at some point that this movie was shot in England, but as I was watching it, I was looking at the New York scenes, and I kept thinking like, there's something uncanny about this. Like, it sort of looks like New York, but it sort of doesn't. And I was like, this is so brilliant. Like, how did they achieve this effect? It's like easy answer. They didn't shoot in New
it's
York.
just not New York. Yeah, well, there was part of it where I was like, that looks like a castle that would be in Europe. And I'm like, oh, it's because it's a castle that is
yeah, that's right.
Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our actual discussion of this movie. He's walking. He's really walking.
So much walking. Does he ever run in this movie?
Oh my. No, he doesn't run in this movie. Okay. Nope. I hate this movie now. I hate this movie. There's no running. Tom Cruise isn't running in it.
This movie is such a great, so I adore Tom Cruise as an actor.
I love him.
I think he's so talented.
He's insane as a person.
I will speak nothing to him as a person, but as an actor, he is so ridiculously talented. And I love the Mission Impossible movies. We've talked about them before. I'm very excited for the last one. But I really, really hope that after the last one is out, he will go back to working with auteurs and really trying to stretch himself and find different aspects of his persona to play with. Because when he does, during this whole late 90s, early 2000s period, when he was making Magnolia and stuff like that, it's just magic. It's so magnetic, and there's just so much to find, in what he's able to do. And this movie is so interesting because it is Tom Cruise at the height of his movie star persona, and this movie is all about how he's a little dork who's sexually frustrated and jealous of his wife and impotent, and it's clowning on him and making him this really pathetic figure in certain ways. And not that I don't like his character a lot and have empathy for him in certain ways, but like this movie's very critical on his character, and to be a handsome movie star in a movie that's constantly questioning your masculinity is just it's great. Like I love the fact that he took this role and was willing to just allow Kubrick to do what he wanted with him as an actor. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, Geneva, you and I have talked about this before. I also hope for a return to some dramatic performances for Tom Cruise. I second everything about the it's my favorite franchise. I love the Mission Impossible movies. Edge of Tomorrow was fantastic. Like, I've loved his 25-year like action, stint that he's been on. But I went on a Tom Cruise binge a few years ago and watched all of his old stuff, and I was like, man, he's such a not just talented, he's so versatile. Like he can do
like surprisingly versatile.
And I hope that as he gets older, he can go back to more dramatic things. Anyway, so diving into this movie a little bit, I didn't really know entirely how to talk about this, because this movie is something to me where in my mind, there isn't like a lot that happens in terms of plot. I feel like this movie is asking a lot of like philosophical and existential questions that come about because of what's happening on screen. But I feel like the actual plot is just kind of creating space for these questions to be discussed. So part of me just wants to talk about the philosophy of this movie and like what it's actually getting into, as opposed to like the actual, stuff that happens in it. But I think I'd like to just start with, at a basic level, what do we think about the performances in this movie? Obviously, the two main characters are, Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise playing Dr. Hartford and Alice Hartford. But then we also have like a pretty broad supporting cast as well of all different kinds of people. So I don't know if there's anyone in particular you want to talk about. We could start with Tom Cruise's performance if you want, and his character. I kind of like that you called him a dork, because part of me in the beginning of the movie, I feel like it tries to set him up as this like, very charismatic asshole that like all of the women want. And he's just kind of like, ugh, like, I just want a woman on my arm sort of thing. And then as it goes on, it's like, I mean, you're definitely still an asshole, but you're also kind of like, I don't know, in a lot of ways, he acts immature, but also very relatable. Like, I don't know. I find his character to be absolutely fascinating. But before we dive into that, what are your thoughts on his performance? Because once I start talking about his character, then I'll get sucked into the philosophy and I won't stop.
Good.
So
sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know, almost don't know how to talk about these performances, because it's just like, they're all excellent. Like, I can't think of a true weak link of this cast. I think Tom Cruise is great. I think Nicole Kidman, I mean, this movie's like, obviously I've always known that she's a fantastic actress, but watching this movie for the first time, this is my second watch. The first time I watched this movie,
I should have asked.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Rewind. Geneva, what is your relationship to this movie?
Well, Tatum, this is my second time watching this movie.
This is the second episode that I've hosted where I've forgotten to do that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I always forget to do that too. I'm trying to think. I only watched this movie for the first time within the last few years. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was not too long ago. It may have been actually, because I also did sort of a mini Tom Cruise deep dive a couple years ago. Not an intense deep dive, but sort of like over the course of several months, I kind of went back and watched a bunch of classic Tom Cruise movies. This may have been part of that, but I don't remember. But I do remember thinking it was fantastic and deeply uncomfortable in certain parts. And also that there was just so much to dive into that I knew I was not getting on that watch, but that I knew that you know, inevitably I was going to rewatch it, and that just more every single watch. It's one of those movies where you just know every single watch you're going to get something new out of it. And definitely on this watch, there were all sorts of things that I didn't notice the first time. There were things I was thinking about. There were just things about the lighting and the composition that I was like, "Oh, that's such a clever, like, you know, bringing this back in this part and this part." And it's such a rich movie, you know. There's just so much to it. And I really like the way you phrased it as it's not about giving answers, it's about giving space for the discussion, because I think that's really what makes this movie so magical, is it's raising all of these questions, it's evoking these feelings and these fears that we have in us, and then it's just sort of allowing us to hold space for them for a little bit, not to quote some recent Wicked meme culture, but yeah, it's just a movie for bringing these things to the surface and allowing us to sit with them for a little bit, you know?
Yeah, similar to you, I was on some sort of Tom Cruise binge a few years ago, and this movie came up. So I'm a very large Stanley Kubrick fan in terms of his movies. He has made some of my favorite movies of all time. But this movie was one that I was hesitant to watch because, like, if you ever look up online, you know, rankings of Stanley Kubrick films, this one is always close to the bottom, and it just keeps,
really?
Yes.
Interesting.
And I was always told and always heard, like, yeah, it's just the orgy movie. And I was like, okay, if it's just an orgy movie, I'm not interested. But I finally watched it during my Tom Cruise binge, and I was like, wow, what? Like, everyone is wrong. This movie is fantastic. Like, this movie is incredible. And so I just remember last time around being so engrossed in the cinematography and the vibes of the movie, and just, I don't think I really absorbed the questions as much last time. I was kind of just like walking through the world with this character, and I was just fascinated by each new layer he would uncover. But this time around, I was like, wow, these questions are very, I don't know, I just feel like they're very relatable, and I think this movie does such a good job of, like, not criticizing necessarily people's fantasies or how people respond to someone else's fantasies. Like, it doesn't seem to be really critiquing anything. It's kind of just commenting on, like, these things exist, and, like, how does that affect people, and how, like, what does that look like? And I found it to be, not in a bad way, but I found it to be a lot more upsetting this time around, of like, oh wow, these are like legitimate questions and struggles that people face. Like, you can be in a very, I think they say in this movie 7 years, like, you can be in a very committed long-term relationship, and you can still have, like, sexual fantasies that can't be fulfilled within your marriage. And, like, what does that mean? And, like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like, how do you respond to it? Is your response good? Is your response bad? Like, is there even such a thing as good or bad? Like, no, but also, like, anyway, I loved it this time around. I loved it even more. I still struggle with, like, is this movie empowering or disempowering to women? Quite frankly, I don't think it's either. I don't think this movie is trying to empower or disempower anybody. I do like that this movie recognizes, remember when we did Philadelphia Story a few weeks back, and Uncle What's-His-Face was like, so yep, old men have this, but it's like, okay, but women have, like, sexual sides to themselves as well. And I think this movie does a really good job of showing, like, no, women also have sexual desires. Like, it's not just men. And so I like that kind of balance that they're creating, but also, like, obviously the ratio of naked women to naked men in this movie is, like,
what is it,
like
100 to 1?
like
Actually, no, 100 to 0. Is there a single instance of male nudity in this movie. Maybe some of the background orgy members, but
even then, it's like it's not.
Yeah.
So it's unbalanced. So that's the thing where I'm like, okay, are we having this much in here just to like turn on the audience? In certain moments, I don't think so, but in other moments, yes. So I kind of struggle with that a little bit. But anyway, those are my overall thoughts on the movie. Sorry, this is very all over the place.
No, it's good.
But yeah, so just kind of circling back to the performances, like was there a particular performance or a particular acting moment that like really stood out to you?
I mean, I feel like, Tom Cruise is in the majority of the movie, but Nicole Kidman's scenes are there's such showcases for her. It's really hard not to come away with those standing forefront in your mind. I mean, just the monologue that she gives at the beginning, the thing that sends Bill's character off in his own little spiral breakdown, where she's high and she's like, she keeps arguing with him and trying to pick fights with him, and they're both high and they're both like, he's like, what? I can't even follow your logic. Like, what is going on? And then she gives that monologue about her fantasy that she, had never told him about, obviously because she knew it would hurt him. And that, it's just an all time, an all timer. She's so magnetic in the way that the camera just, holds on her. It doesn't need to really do anything except just kind of sit next to her and watch what she's doing. And she just absolutely commands it. And every little, her vocal performance is very soft and it's very hesitating. And she speaks every sentence so slowly.
But her eyes are so intense.
It's just, she knows every single word that she's speaking is a dagger, and she's doing it intentionally. But you can also sense this, like, there's a sense of frustration and pain that's causing it as well. And then of course you have the sort of inverse to that later on when he comes home and she's waking up from a dream, and it's like she in her dream had her fantasy fulfilled and it was the worst thing ever, and she's having this moment of like panic and disillusionment and what if I've messed everything up forever. And it's also just so magnetic as well. So anyway, all that is to say is, I mean, Nicole Kidman's monologues, and she has a couple more in this movie. Obviously, we did the last one as the opening quote for this episode, but her screen time is pretty short, but everything she does in this movie is just so magnetic.
Yeah, her screen time is very short, but I think that she is the core of this movie. Like, she is the one who kind of gives voice to Tom Cruise's wandering journeys, like just walking the streets of New York and going into random homes and castles and whatever. And I think that like she seems to be very aware of like what these fantasies mean, but she's also like very upfront and honest about them. Like, she doesn't keep them from him. She's very much so like, she owns what her fantasies are and what her experiences are. And from what I remember, like, she doesn't really apologize for anything. She just expresses what her fantasies are, and like they make her feel certain ways, but I don't think she ever says like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because
although I will say, I mean, it's something that she has been holding back for, I think she says it's like a year ago that this happened, or 8 months ago or something. Like, it's been a long time that she's been sitting on this and has not said anything about it. But then in the context of the argument that they're having, she just decides now is the time. And like you say, she doesn't apologize for it. She's just saying, you think I'm this way. You think you're so secure in the fact that I would never cheat on you. But sorry to burst your bubble, but here's actually something that, happened, that I experienced, that I thought about, that I felt. and that I have chosen not to tell you until now.
Yeah, and I think it's a very interesting dynamic of like, she doesn't need to apologize because she hasn't done anything. Like, what's happening in your brain, especially while you're sleeping, like, is what's happening in your brain while you're sleeping. So she doesn't need to apologize for it. But at the same time, like, there are ramifications for like her expressing these things in terms of, you know, she knows it's going to affect him and all of that. And I just think like, yeah, it's just, it's such a complex dynamic of knowing like, I don't need to apologize for this. Also, she doesn't owe him anything. Like your partner doesn't have to know every single thing that happens in your mind, but also there's just so much here of like, she doesn't owe him anything, but also like, does she, if she's in a committed relation, like, and that's just her perspective of things. Like, then he has his own dynamic of his side of things where, you know, he's not necessarily experiencing things in his head. He's like going out and facing it up front and then deciding in that moment not to do anything. Or would he, if this thing hadn't come in and like changed, like every single time he has access to actually like engage in something sexual with somebody, he gets a phone call or someone has AIDS, or like, it's just there's just so much here. And having these two different dynamics of like, her responses or like her experiences are a lot more based in like her own existence as a sexual being, whereas his is a lot more based in like jealousy and responding to and reacting to what she's told him, which I think are two very different places to start from, but they both involve sexual fantasies. And like, what does that mean in the context of like the questions, the philosophy here? I'm obsessed with it. Like, there's no, in my opinion, with what is happening here, there isn't any strict right or wrong, aside from in the very beginning when Dr. Cruise, when Tom Cruise's character, when Tom Cruise's character very clearly states that like, he thinks that, you know, she couldn't go off and be somewhere else. Like, that's kind of an assumption that's not okay. Like, whatever. Like, but aside from that, like, catalyst, I guess, to everything else, there's so much happening here that's like, depending on what side of it, you could say it's right or wrong. But objectively, there isn't really a right or wrong.
Yeah. Well, I found it so interesting in their initial argument that they're having, how the things that she's objecting to, like the responses he's giving her, like in another context, maybe with another person or said in another way, in another setting, I think most of what he's saying is good or like complimentary. Like, it's not offensive. Like, he's saying like, I trust you. I don't think you're ever going to cheat on me. Like, in another context, that's a wonderful thing to say, to know that your partner trusts you. But the way that she's choosing to interpret it in that moment, and, you know, it seems based on her immediate experience and also her longstanding experience living with this person, is like, you don't think I would ever cheat on you, not because you trust me, but because you don't see me as a full person who has the ability to have sexual desires and fantasies outside of you. Like, to you, I end at you, if that makes sense. And I don't think that's necessarily, I mean, I don't think that's what he means, but I think she's getting at something very true about him and their relationship.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely coming from different sides of the spectrum. And I think that, I mean, he even asks her in that argument, like, what are we even talking about? Like, I don't understand.
He's so
like,
confused.
Like, how did we get here? What is happening? And
why does it seem like everything I am saying you're taking exception to when I mean them in a complimentary way, you know?
Also, like, putting myself in the mindset of having a conversation like that when you're high is like a whole other level of like wait, what? Like
Seems like
what
a bad
did you
idea.
just like? What did you just say? I forgot. Like
Yeah.
you just spoke for a long time. I forget the first half of what you said. Like what's going on? So what? Kind of pivoting a little bit. We touched on this before. I don't have an answer to this. I'm just musing over here. Do you have any thoughts regarding like what is the actual meaning behind like the fact that Tom Cruise, every time he has these opportunities to like have some sort of sexual experience outside of his marriage, something gets in the way? Like we see it in the beginning at that ball when he meets those two women and he's like, yeah, let's go do something. And then his friend calls him up into this other room because this woman is ODing. And then there's another time when he goes to this prostitute's home and then he gets a phone call and then he goes to the orgy and then obviously like gets kicked out in a super overly dramatic way. Like it just keeps happening over and over. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been pondering this as well too, and I feel like there are
like,
multiple.
Would he have gone through with it? Like,
yeah,
is it just like,
I mean,
this is what
the
does
great
it mean
question.
that he didn't even have to make like he
that
didn't
he doesn't
have to make a
the
choice
Mm-hmm.
because fate just is like no. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I know. I've been really turning this over in my mind. I feel like there are a couple different possible answers to this. I think one thing that comes to mind is just that it adds to the dreamy nature of this film, where you know how like in a dream it's like, you know, classically you can never die in a dream, or like sometimes in a dream you'll be trying to get someplace and then the moment you're about to get there all of a sudden the scene changes. You know, there's a sense of like always trying to reach something and it never being fulfilled. And I feel like there's a little bit of that to his journey. And because for me, overall, like rewatching this movie, the theme that really stuck out to me was this idea of trying to reach something that is forbidden to you, or something that has always been hidden to you, something that you should not be able, seeing something that you should not be able to see, you know? So at the beginning, he's very confident in himself and his place in the world. You know, he's rich, he's handsome, he's got this beautiful wife.
He can get in anywhere
home.
he wants with his doctor ID. Like, just show someone that you're a doctor and they'll let you right in.
I was listening to a podcast episode on this movie back when I first saw it, and they talked about how he flashes his medical
like
license
badge?
as if it's like an FBI badge. It's so ridiculous.
He's like, I'm a doctor. Let me see the
I'm
body.
a doctor. Here, look at my badge. Look at my medical board license.
And people are fine with it. They're like, yeah, sure, I'll give you all this
take you into the
personal
morgue.
information just because you're a doctor. Great.
It's so funny. Anyway, yes. So the idea of, so he starts out the movie in this very like confident place. But then because of this spiraling argument, he suddenly gets a glimpse into the inner workings of his wife's mind, the person who he thought he knew most in the world, and realizes that there are all these hidden depths that he had no idea about, and that he, like, what even is his place in her fantasies? It seems like he's always off somewhere, you know, like, and that just completely throws him off course. And so he, in all his wanderings, he's always trying to let me go into the thing that, you know, has always been hidden from me. Like, let me actually like try to go home with a prostitute, which I've never done before. Let me try and kind of do the ultimate thing of getting into this secret elite club of all the rich people and see what goes on there. And then the movie is basically, when you try to access that hidden knowledge, bad things are going to happen. Like, you find out what your wife is really thinking about. It's not about you, and it doesn't reflect very well on you. You know, you find out what the rich elite are actually up to. It's weird, creepy rituals and orgies that end up with people dead. Like, it's just incredibly destabilizing. And so the fact that the movie then like brings him back around to this place, him and his wife back around to this place where it's like, well, you know, we've kind of delved into each other's minds and didn't totally like what we see, but we're still here. And, you know, we're still together. We're still going to try and I just kind of do the next thing, like continue to reconnect with each other. it's just such a human journey that I found incredibly beautiful and profound this time around. You know, there's like so much to the world that is mysterious to us. And honestly, if we found out what it really was, our tiny human brains couldn't comprehend it. But, you know, we've got to deal with life somehow, and we just got to keep going. So anyway, I think I went way off from actually answering your question.
No, I love hearing all of your thoughts. I think it's great. And you actually reminded me that I was watching this movie and I was like, this is giving me David Lynch vibes. Like this feels very dreamlike, like Mulholland Drive in a lot of ways, of just like, okay, so is this really happening? Where are we even going? Like, does any of this matter? Is this real? And and it also had this kind of like, you know, suspense, thriller, foreboding sort of, you know, just like uncertainty and like potential risk and all of that. I thought it felt very dreamlike. And I love how that mirrors the fact that Nicole Kidman's fantasies actually happen in a dream. Like hers are literally in a dream. His are like in what feels like a dream. So what's the difference? And that was why I chose that final sequence for our quote at the opening of this movie, because, you know, I was doing research online to get like reviews for this movie, and there were several people, Roger Ebert being one of them, that were like, we don't like that this ending kind of ties up the ambiguity of this with a bow. And I don't think that that's what
I
the
don't
end
think
of this
it does
movie
it at all.
does.
No. Yeah.
And I love that the ending of this literally says, like, whether it's in a dream or it's not in a dream, like, we get to choose whether or not it means anything to us in our relationship. And at the end of the day, what are we going to do about it? Like, there's nothing we can do about it. It happened. So we can either end this or we can move forward. And the movie's just kind of like, well, there's nothing we can do. And it doesn't have to mean anything. It can mean everything or it can mean nothing. And we're just like, well, let's fuck. Literally, what else are we supposed to do? Like, you know?
Yeah. We just continue to choose each other and continue to actively work to come back together for as long as we think that it makes sense to continue making this work.
Because I think that that's a lot of, for me at least, a lot of the reason why this movie works, because in a lot of ways it does feel very like fantastical and dreamlike, especially the orgy. I'm like, I mean, this is a sex cult, but like, how real, like, does this actually, maybe it probably does somewhere. Honestly, I don't know. But like,
if I found out all the like billionaires and oligarchs in the world that this is what they were up to, I don't know that I'd be shocked. I'd be like, yeah, I guess, whatever, makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine.
When you've got so much money, literally you're like, how can we make our own fun? Let's just exploit people and, you know, do these crazy rituals that mean nothing just because we're bored. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, I like how the ending brings it to a human place, because I feel like this movie could very well have ended up kind of in more of a Lynchian place of like, it's all a dream. And this movie was like, no, it is very dreamlike, but it's also rooted in reality, which to me makes it a lot more powerful of like, no, I can really relate to this because this is like a real human emotion and a real experience that like I feel being represented through a movie. And I think that if the ending, I don't know, I just think the ending helps me connect more with the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if it had just ended with Tom Cruise going home and going to sleep in the bed, or him just being like, I'm sorry, I'll tell you everything, and then it's over. I don't know. I really like the ending to this movie.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like this is not the type of movie where it would make sense to leave it off before those two characters have had a chance to bring their relationship full circle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so we had talked a little bit before about Nicole Kidman's second, I think it's her second monologue, where she wakes up in bed and he comes home and she's telling him about the dream because she's like giggling in the dream, and then she tells him and he's like, that's
and she's
not
like,
where it ends though, does it?
Uh-huh.
And do you see any like significance there between the fact that when she's telling him about this dream, her dream is an orgy, like she's having sex with all of these people, and she's telling him this dream, like theoretically she was dreaming this at the same time that he was at an actual orgy. And I find like there's no way that that's just a coincidence, but like in terms of the movie and how it's structured. But I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that specifically.
Yeah, I also noticed that, and I was trying to figure out what kind of what I thought about it.
Do you notice how I'm asking you the questions first, and then I'm just bouncing off of whatever you say, because I don't have answers to anything?
Yeah. I think one thought that I had, I don't know if this is the primary meaning. I mean, I don't think you could even say there is a primary meaning behind anything. But one thought that I had is just, he's just been at this orgy where everyone is so dehumanized, and the women literally have masks and then are completely naked, and it's just about bodies. It's not about faces. It's not about individuals. It's just about like
it also looks like each woman is assigned to a man, like but
yeah,
also maybe the women have a choice. Maybe they can walk and choose. I don't know. Unclear.
But definitely there is some sort of extreme end of commodification made of women where they are made faceless and they are sort of vessels for sexual gratification. And then he comes home and sees his wife, who is this person who is so close to him, who he, has this very long-standing and deep relationship with, who has just had a dream where she's on the other end of it, and it's horrifying to her, and it's making her, like, the idea of being part of it once she wakes up is like she's sobbing in his arms because of the idea that she could be part of it. And I just feel like that sort of hits him all the harder because it is kind of putting a face to these experiences that he's just been sort of, voyeuristically observing. And now all of a sudden he's kind of seeing the back end of it, if that makes sense. That was the one thought that I had.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm trying to think if I'm smart enough to have some sort of interpretation of that as well.
One thing that I noticed too, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to end this sentence by tying these two things together, but just the first monologue that she does, I was really struck by the line where, like, she's doing her monologue, she's talking about how she had this very vivid fantasy and she wanted to run away with this like young handsome naval officer. She's like, if he wanted me, I would have given up everything for him. And she's saying these things in a way where you can tell she's trying to hurt her husband. But then she also has this line where she says, and yet at the same time, you were dearer to me than ever before. And so I just find it so interesting that, like, in her fantasies, there's this push and pull against him, and it's the same with the dream, where it's like in the dream she's sort of, what's the term, cucking him, like having sex with other men and laughing in his face, and then she wakes up and she's horrified by it. It's like this sort of complexity of, like, we can want things in one part of our mind, but then in another part of our mind be horrified by wanting it and cling all the closer to the thing that we know it hurts. Like, humans are complex.
Yeah, and then that gets back into the question of, like, how much does this actually matter? Like, these fantasies could mean everything to a relationship, but they also don't have to, because it doesn't have to mean any, like,
yeah.
And I love that question, because I think it's such a, I don't know, I would like to think I think that I theorize that I speculate that is just a very common experience for a lot of people in relationships, of just like, okay, something happened in a dream, or not even in a dream, like I had this thought, and like what does that mean? Like, do I need to tell my partner this? But it doesn't mean anything. But does it? Like,
does it reflect, how much does it actually reflect me and my...
Yeah, it's like, I don't think I want this, but the fact that I had this dream, does that mean that, am I not, it's just, it's such a, it's just such a human experience. And the fact that is juxtaposed with her husband having these opportunities in real life and saying no, they both have the opportunity to be unfaithful in their own ways. Mm-hmm. And both of them are prevented from doing what they want, but is it what they want? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. it's what they want, but it's also not what they want at the same time. So what do you do with that? You fuck. That's how the movie ends. It's like, it's just okay. I did want to ask, because I feel like we could talk in circles about that question. I think it's a fascinating question, but there ultimately is no answer to it. One thing that I was really curious about was, I feel like this movie is very rooted in a lot of like sexual fantasies and sexual desires, but we do have that moment in the beginning of the movie where, I don't know anyone who does this for a doctor. I don't know, but Dr. Hartford gets called to the house of one of his patients who's just died.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think that happens in real life. I don't think legally you can even do that. I don't know.
Well, he mentions like the whole reason that they were at that party at the beginning is because he was like the personal doctor to the Stanley Pollock character who's like really rich, and he does house calls for him. So he seems to have some sort of like private practice where he will do house calls for certain wealthy clients. So I'm assuming that that's like similar situation to this guy.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't know about the legality of it, but
yeah. But anyway, so the daughter of the person who died, she ends up confessing to him that she loves him. And he's like, girl, we barely know each other. Like, you don't know anything about me. You're grieving. I don't think you really understand what you're saying right now. And I think he handles it in a very gentle way. Yeah. But I just find it to be very, like, it feels almost out of place in this movie because so much of the, like, rational, irrational, whatever you want to call it, like, decisions that people are making when it comes to being involved with someone else are very rooted in, like, very sexually driven. Whereas this is, like, love, or at least this woman saying she's in love, and it's rooted in, like, a very real grief. So having that addition to this, but specifically in the beginning of the film, I find to be like, why? I'm so curious as to why.
I actually do have a rationale that I was thinking of as I was watching this movie.
Tell me.
And so one of the things that I think is so great about the character Bill Hartford, which is, and like Tom Cruise's performance playing him, is how the movie kind of vacillates for him between like his baser, more selfish motives and then his sort of better person aspects, kind of between the like, here's the base part of my brain that just wants to like screw any beautiful woman who comes across. And then here's the part of my brain who's like, actually, I should care about this person. Let me like, do the right thing. And I think for him, he's kind of like constantly going back and forth. So for me, the reason that scene is there is because he is, he's just come off of this argument with his wife where he's like completely spiraling about like, who is she? What is my relationship to her? What is my place in the world? What is going on? And then he has this beautiful woman who's unexpectedly throwing herself at him, but he knows that it's not real. He probably has, never seen her in any sort of like sexual way, like because he's been a doctor to her father. And he knows it's because of grief. And so, the better part of him is working. And he's like, no, let's take a step back. Like, this is not actually what you feel. We don't really know each other. You're just saying this because you're grieving. Let me try and like calm you down and redirect you toward your actual boyfriend, who is the person who loves you and is going to support you. But then I feel like this very human motive takes over where it's like, because I just did a good thing, And because I feel like the person I love has hurt me because she's been fantasizing about someone else, that then gives me license to go out and get a little closer to doing a bad thing that I would have before. Because right after this is when he's walking home and the prostitute is like talking to him and he decides to go along with it. And I don't think he would have done that if he had not just done the good thing with the daughter. You know, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, because I am a good person, I get a little treat, you know?
But then he calls her again later. It's so interesting that all of these interactions that he has where, like, you know, he theoretically has access to sexual gratification and he says no because something gets in the way or whatever. He then, like, follows up on them later, but doesn't do, like, nothing happens. Like, he calls her later and then I think her fiance picks up and he just hangs up the phone. Like, dude, wake up, make up your mind. But also, like, but also you're very conflicted and that's very human. Like, that makes sense. It's frustrating, but also, like, it's just as frustrating for you, I'm sure, if not more so than it is for me, like, as a viewer. And yeah, I just found it to be very, not necessarily, well, yeah, I just find it fascinating that, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to see that scene from the woman's perspective. Maybe it's more so about how this woman, what she says, how that affects Dr. Hartford's character, as opposed to, like, what are her motivations. But I just find it to be, I don't know, intriguing that this woman reaches out for love in a moment of grief with someone that she doesn't know very well.
Yeah.
But
I mean, my interpretation of why she does that is it is purely grief talking, but also a bit of fear about, because they have this conversation which, by the way, they're having this conversation fully in the same room where her dead father is lying on the bed. I'm like, guys, go into the room next door. Like, at least cover his face, like, do something. But anyway, they're having this conversation about how, like, you know, she has this boyfriend, she's planning to marry him, they're going to move away. And I feel like the way she says it is there's a bit of trepidation there. And it makes sense in the sense of, like, you know, you're fully in grief and shock and you're having this conversation because you're trying to distract yourself. But I think there's also, my interpretation was there could potentially be a bit of fear of, like, I actually don't know if I want to be with Carl. I don't know if I want to get married. I don't know if I want to move away. I've just kind of been making these plans, but I don't know if they're actually the right choice. Now, all of a sudden, I'm in the midst of this disorienting shock. My father's just died. It feels like the next thing to do is to go through these plans, and I don't know if they're right. So I'm just going to kind of latch on to the nearest thing, which is this handsome doctor who's been around, and sort of, like, yeah, like, lash out in a way of, like, let me see if I can blow up my life in this moment because I don't know what else to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I also have an interpretation of, I think it's just adding on to this idea or this reality that women can be unpredictable because, you know, men on one side of it could be like, yeah, I've got this, like, I've got her locked down, like, whatever. And there is, like, a really beautiful side to having security in a relationship. Like there is, that's not a bad thing to have security in a relationship. But I think this movie just really kind of turns certain stereotypes on its head of, like, yeah, women have feelings and impulses and things that might surprise their male partners in a lot of ways. And I think that this is just, like, a different angle that this movie approaches that from a distance, because we don't really know much about these characters. But the fact that it's also kind of back to back with Alice's confession of her dreams, and then he goes here and then sees another element of it of, like, oh my gosh, you're in a happy soon to be marriage and you're going to throw that all away. Like, for what? You know, him kind of seeing that in front of him in that moment of, like, you know, it's not exactly the same as the conversation he just had with his wife, but, like, there is a parallel there that maybe is a little bit nerve-wracking to him. So yeah, I don't know, that was kind of like my main interpretation of that scene. But I also don't disagree with what you're saying of, like, how it propels the story and is almost like a domino effect sort of thing.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. You're coming at it from the perspective of why does she do that? And I'm coming at it from the perspective of why does he do that? Wait, what is it?
I just said domino effect.
Oh.
No, he sees Marion, who's the daughter of the person who dies.
Yeah.
The next person he meets is Domino, the prostitute.
What does it mean?
This is like when I was in film school, I would have wrote a whole paper on like, so the reason this character was named Domino is because, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what it is, but I'm thinking that because of what you just said, like, I wonder if there's a significance there of like, okay, the domino is rolling. Like it started with the conversation with the wife, and then it started with seeing like a shaky marriage, and now it's going to like, oh, now we're talking to a sex worker. Now we're going to an orgy. Like there is kind of this like more, I don't want to use the word extreme, but like more societally unacceptable expressions of sex throughout time as he like continues to wander the streets over the course of 2 days. Interesting. I'm interpreting things. I feel like that kind of makes sense though. I feel like there's something there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, it's just good storytelling. Every experience he has, you can see the psychological effect that it has on him and why it leads him to take the next action that he takes. And like too, you know, he receives that call from his wife, which is the thing that keeps him from going through with sleeping with Domino. And you really get the sense of it's the guilt that draws him away from her, but it's also that feeling of, I don't want to go home and like finish up this conversation that we started. Let me find another excuse to stay out, which is why he goes to the nightclub where his friend is performing. And then when his friend like, Buddy needs to learn to like keep his trap shut. Like, come on, Nick. Just hearing that there's something to him, something that is forbidden to him. Like he doesn't even know it's going to be an orgy. He just hears that it's something mysterious where there's secrecy and only a few people can get in.
Piano
and he's
guy,
just like,
the piano guy did tell him, he's like, the
that's
mask
true.
wasn't
That's
on
true.
super
You're
tight
right.
last time, and these women.
Yeah, you're right.
Blah, blah, blah. So he did kind of know
knew
what he was getting into.
Yeah, something forbidden and sexual of nature, and he was like, I gotta be there. I gotta be there.
Yeah, sign me up.
Sign me up. Which, by the way, I was like, how late is it at any given point? How long does it take to take a taxi cab out to this like mansion?
After going to get a costume, after
going
waking
to,
someone
we didn't
up
even
in the
talk
middle
about
of the
that
night.
whole like weird, whatever weird, creepy.
Before we jump into that, I wanted to talk about one other thing real quick because that has been in my mind of like what the fuck happens at that costume shop? Like what is
I also have a
there?
question for you, but ask your question first.
Okay. I don't know if it's a question as much as a commentary, but I love how in this movie we have all of these like deep, intense conversations between like Dr. Hartford and Alice, his wife. We have these really intense conversations between them where they're expressing like, you know, how they feel, how they're hurt. We're seeing so much drama and like emotional turmoil happening on an individual level for both of them, but also in between each other. But then we get these scenes of like these phone calls where Alice is like just at home, reading the paper, eating dinner, doing this, that, or the other. And in those moments, their relationship feels so grounded and normal and healthy and just like, comfortable, familiar. We've been together a long time. And I love that dynamic of like relationships can be both things at the same time. Of like, you can have these things that you're really, really struggling with, but then also like have this solid ground that your relationship is built on, and like it shakes it and threatens to break it, but also like perhaps it's rooted enough that it'll be fine. I don't know. I just feel like this movie could have very easily been like conflict between the two of them. And I think part of the reason why this movie works is like, I do see why they're together. Like I see a universe of them like meeting each other, falling in love, getting married, like because we get those little glimpses. And I love that there's such brief moments added to the film, but I think even though they're brief, they add so much depth and layers that, I don't know, just make this all the better to watch.
Yeah. I love the compressed time frame of this movie and the structure of it, where it's like this sort of like I always think of it as the sort of like Shakespearean Midsummer Night's Dream structure, where it's like we ordinary people living ordinary lives, and then you enter this magical forest for a night and everything gets, rearranged and all these crazy magical things happen and it's very dreamlike. And then at the end, we come out of it and we're back in our ordinary lives, not quite sure what was real, what wasn't, but we're changed because of this sort of dreamlike experience we've had. I mean, that's very much, you can see them being a pretty ordinary couple with their ups and downs before this. And then with the ending, it seems they're going to continue, hopefully a little bit more understanding of each other, a little bit closer, a little bit more, sort of aware of things that are going on beneath the surface for each of them. But yeah, back to reality.
Yeah. This movie. It's so good. It's so good. I love it so much.
So much.
Okay. So you were approaching the storyline of the costume shop, Rainbow something.
Wait, can I ask you one other quick question? Because it's kind of related to that first argument they have before we move away from that fully. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I keep asking myself when I watch this movie is why is there so much nudity? What is it's almost entirely
valid question.
Female
it's
nudity.
Hard to avoid that question.
There are a lot of boobs in this movie. And
it's not just boobs, it's everything.
It's everything.
It's everything.
But I found really interesting this watch, the line during their argument when she brings up you're a doctor.
Argument?
What?
Which argument?
Oh, sorry. The argument at the beginning when they're both smoking weed. And he's they're talking about who's jealous, who's not. And she's like, you're a doctor. You have beautiful women who come into your office and you're seeing them naked and you're touching them. And are you telling me that you're not in any way, that's not exciting for you? And he's like, no, because I'm a doctor and that's not the situation.
She's been sitting on that for years.
Yeah.
She's been sitting on that insecurity for a long time.
Yeah. So my question to you is, do you believe him? Do you think he's telling the truth when he says that? I mean, for the sake of his professional medical ethics, I certainly hope so, but for the sake of him as a character. And also because I was kind of connecting this to this question of there's so much nudity in this movie that, to me at least, at a certain point, it also almost starts to feel routine. And I'm is that kind of the intention of we just pummel you with so much that it stops almost being sexual in a way that puts you in the headspace of Bill in a sense? But maybe I'm just I don't know, putting too much into it.
I think that Dr. Hartford strikes me as someone who would sit with a seemingly, he appears to be a straight man who would sit with a naked woman and try to convince himself that he's turned on by it, but isn't actually. He seems like someone that would try and convince himself to really get into it, but I feel like that's what he's doing this whole movie. He's trying to convince himself to be promiscuous, but because it's he's a doctor. He's this, handsome suit and tie, has everything. He's supposed to be that guy, but he's not that guy. He's just not. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I believe him, but not fully believe him, if that makes sense. Also, we get that very brief montage of him at the office with all of these patients. What kind of doctor is this man? He's seeing children, he's who are fully clothed. He's seeing women entirely naked. He's seeing old men. What is it? What kind of we know that he's not a hair doctor because what's his face shows him his bald spot. And
he's like, don't ask me about that.
It's you need to go see a blah 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 list. But I'm what kind of doctor are you? I don't know.
Very general practitioner, pediatrician, and a
and all age.
I think the answer is he's a doctor for rich people.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's my answer.
Well, that's really interesting. Well, especially too, if you think about like as another element of sort of like what's pushing him psychologically along in his journey, when I forget, it's toward the beginning. I forget where exactly it is. Might be between Marion and Domino, or maybe it's before, but he has that encounter with the group of street toughs, and they all like insult him with these very homophobic terms. And he's just like kind of shocked by it. And like, I don't know exactly how, but it clearly contributes in some way to the decisions he makes after that.
Yeah, he's just an insecure little man.
Yeah, insecure is a good word, I think.
Which doesn't justify actions, but it does justify questions that you have and how you approach your life. Yeah, so okay, do you have any thoughts on the costume shop?
Oh boy.
That is the one part of the movie where I'm like, we don't need this. Like it adds a humor that I don't think this movie calls for. I don't think we need humor in this movie. I also get extremely uncomfortable seeing a girl that young dressed like that, being sexualized by men of that age, especially learning later on that she's being prostituted by her father, seemingly against her will.
The thing is, it seems to be
also,
very
much
is it not
racist. Like
it seems to be. Well, she seems to be very into it, which kind of makes it even more disturbing.
And then I'm also like, is this racist? Is this like transphobic? Are they drag? Like, I don't. It's just very out of place to me. And I feel like Stanley Kubrick wanted to have the shock value of like, yeah, let's involve young women in this too. It's not just adult women. It's also children. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about an older white man putting himself in the shoes and the motivations of a like 13-year-old girl when it comes to like, I don't know. That part of the movie just feels unnecessary and kind of removed. Like I feel like we don't need it, but that's kind of my response. Like, we don't need the humor. We don't need the point of like, this exists for young girls as well. We don't need like, why are these the only people of color in this whole entire movie? Aside from the black guy at the morgue who opens up the cabinet, like, it's such a weird sequence. It's so strange to me. Like, I get it. He had to go somewhere to get a costume, but like, we didn't need all this extra jargon that's happening here.
I don't really see what it's doing here, except in continuing that same theme of like, he keeps stumbling on things that worlds that things that he should not be seeing, worlds that he is not part of and has no knowledge of or access into. And then once he stumbles on them, he has no idea how to react. I mean, he certainly doesn't do what he really should do and call the police.
Right. Yeah, especially when he goes
gets
back
his costume
later.
and leaves.
I mean, when he goes back the second time, it's very clear what's happening. Like, because the first time around, it's like, is she consenting to this? But she's underage, so no. But then the second time, it's very blatant. Correct. Like, no, her father he struck a deal with these people so that, like, I don't know what the deal is, but anyway, I don't like that part. I don't. It makes me uncomfortable and it's unnecessary.
I feel like it's probably, I've never read the original story. I wonder if it's something that's in there and then was left in, and I don't know, just maybe could have been excised or at least drastically shortened. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have one final thing for us to talk about, which is the orgy. We really haven't talked about it. I want to talk about your thoughts on the main masked woman, if you have any, as well as kind of what ensues after that of like, are these people actually harmless? Like, is what Victor is telling Dr. Hartford, like, is it real? Is it a lie? Like, did they actually kill this woman? Like, what's going on here? So yeah, do you want to get us kicked off on any thoughts revolving like the actual, not necessarily the vibes of the orgy, but like the storyline of what is happening there and the implications it has on everything else?
Well, so just to make sure I'm reading this correctly, because this is something I wondered about the first time, but then the second time since I was watching with captions, I caught a line of dialogue that I think does answer this, but I just wanted to check. The masked woman at the party, who then dies of an overdose and he sees in the morgue. That is the woman from the beginning, correct?
Yes.
Mandy, who overdoses?
Yes.
Okay, it's all the same woman. Okay.
Mandy, here's Minister Handy. Sorry. It's Christmas time.
I wasn't expecting that, but I love
it.
Sorry. I had to place it. It took me a second. Anyway, it's so interesting because like that then lends, again, with what I was saying before about like really feeling like so much of this orgy is about dehumanizing and taking away the faces of women and kind of reducing them to vessels for sexual gratification. That then creates this really fascinating through line because she is an individual. She's someone who has a prior connection to him. She's someone who has a reason to feel gratitude towards him because he saved her life. And so she saves his life. And
does she save it though? Was he actually a date?
This is the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
But can I just say again with the performances, Sidney Pollack in this movie as Victor, Sidney Pollack, who is of course himself a wonderful director but is also a wonderful actor, he's so fantastic in this movie. I love his performance so much because he's an awful person, an absolutely awful person.
He? I don't understand his relationship to Dr. Hartford. Is he his doctor?
Dr. Hartford is his doctor, yes. That he's the one who threw the party at the beginning, and Bill's like,
right,
this is what we get for paying house calls. We get invited to these super swanky parties.
Okay, gotcha.
That's like his house. But they also seem to have a level of friendship between the two of them. I feel like there's a little bit vibes of Bill looks up to him a little bit as a aspirational figure, like this super rich, powerful man who can get any woman who wants and has this beautiful house and throws these parties and everything like that. And so like, I just feel like Sidney Pollack, he's able to create this character who is an absolutely awful person, who's like this super wealthy old man who's like having sex with much younger women, and then they OD and he's like looking at his watch like, can we send her home now? But there is this weird level of warmth to him where you feel like he actually does care about Bill in a weird way. And when I watched the last 20 minutes tonight before we started recording, the scene that I had stopped was their scene in the pool room where he's trying to basically talk Bill down and be like, I was at the orgy that night when you were also there. I saw what went down. I know who the people are involved. I know who the woman is and what happened to her. Stop investing in it. Don't worry about it. It's, it's not for you. It's too deep and too like, these people are too elite for you to get entangled with them. You're just going to hurt yourself. But also don't worry about it because no one really got harmed.
Well, he also says at one point, he's like, would you believe me if I told you that all of it was a rouge? Like, because that's what it was, but I don't know if you'll believe me given what you saw. And I'm like, I don't. Well, that's pretty elaborate rouge.
What I love about that scene, and what I think is like the sort of point, is we're never going to know. Bill is never going to know for sure if Mandy was killed by these people or if she actually did OD on her own. My personal interpretation is she was killed by them.
Same.
But truly, there's no way for him to know. There's also no way for him to hold them accountable, get justice for her. He has to basically accept at the end that this is just something that he is never going to be able to figure out. He's never going to find, find this like cult again, because they're always changing places. He doesn't have the resources to go up against them. He just has to accept that there's something too powerful and too deeply weird and scary and just kind of live with that, you know?
Yeah, I found it to be quite unbelievable when Dr. Hartford asks about his piano playing friend, and he's like, we sent him back to Seattle, like he's
probably home by now.
And Dr. Hartford's like, the guy said his face was bruised and bleeding, like what?
And Victor's
and
like,
oh,
well, yeah, you got me there, but like it's just one
fine.
little bruise, like who?
I'm like, dude, like there's some sus stuff going on here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
People have your sexual preferences, whatever, but once it, like, if you're in a cult and you're harming, like, no.
Yeah,
that
I'm gonna
guy's
go out on the
dead.
record and say that I'm not. I'm opposed to these,
to killing people.
you know, orgiastic sex parties that end up with people dead. Not a fan.
No, not a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely dead. That guy is not alive anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just this almost nail in the coffin to Dr. Hartford's escapades of like, okay, my family is in danger now, so like,
yeah,
maybe it's not worth it to keep doing this. Like,
down.
What have I actually learned? Have I even had any fun? I don't think so. Like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I also think that is an argument that the movie makes, which I really, really took away this time around, of like, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side. And I think that his character starts to realize, like, oh, I thought that maybe this is what I wanted, but like the more I put myself out here and the more I learn about this, I'm like, actually, I don't want this at all. Like, this isn't fun. This isn't enthralling. Like, I just want to go home to my wife. Like, what am I doing? And I think this movie just really, I don't know. I just think it really expresses this natural human, like, it's like timeline of emotion when you're in a relationship, especially one that's this long, I'm sure, of just like, okay, I've been with you. Do I want to do this? would it be different? And I think like he actually steps out to pursue that and is like, oh no, this is not what I want to do at all. And, yeah, I don't know. I love that this movie, it's yet another layer to this that I think is very human. Yeah.
Well, it's his equivalent of Alice saying, you know, in the midst of her fantasies, you were dearer to me than ever before. Like, it's that idea of being in danger or contemplating losing something makes you appreciate it in a way that you couldn't before.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say something and I forgot what it was.
While you think of it, can I just shout out again the incredible cast in this movie? Well, first of all, Alan Cumming as the hotel like receptionist, who's like, which clearly
again,
super.
Dr. Hartford just flashes his "I'm a doctor," and he's like, "Okay, here's all of the personal information about this person from last night."
But he also has such a huge crush on Dr. Bill, which is you know, understandable. It's very cute.
It's very cute.
And then also Nick Nightingale, played by Todd Field, the director of Tar.
Oh, what?
I just looked this up. I forgot. I'd known this at some point and then forgotten
who?
it. Todd
Which
Field.
Character?
Nick Nightingale, the friend who plays the piano.
Oh, what?
Right? Gives a special like resonance to the fact that
what?
Kate Blanchett ended up voicing that character.
That's wild. Huh.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Wow. Connecting the dots of Hollywood is very fascinating, but also kind of depressing, because the more you get into it, the more you realize, like, oh, these people really just got these opportunities because they knew the right person at the right time. Like, okay, cool.
It's true.
Which is not to say those people are not very talented. Like Kate Blanchett, obviously super talented. Todd Field, super talented. Love them. Anyway, man, I'm not going to remember.
If only I had lived at the same time as Stanley Kubrick, surely he would have recognized my worth and gotten me my start in Hollywood.
Yeah, Stanley Kubrick was great at that, especially with women. He's super good at it. I'm trying to. I don't think. Yeah, I think that the ending to this movie is just brilliant because the answer to all of these questions that we're asking is like, just stay together or don't. And if we're going to stay together, like, all right, let's fuck. Like, it's just kind of like, there's nothing else to do. Like, we're not going to go fuck other people, clearly. So, like, all right. Like, and also, like, one thing I had while watching this movie this time around, which by the time it was over, I was like, okay, I don't think this is the case. But in the beginning, particularly, like, the way the vibe is in that first sequence where they're at the ball and everything, I was like, is this whole thing a game? Like, is this whole thing them trying to, like, liven up their sex life of, like, okay, it's getting a little bit, like, bland or it's been the same for a while. Like, what if we spice things up of, like...
He flirts with someone, I flirt with someone.
Yeah, and we kind of toe this line and, like, I'm going to make up dreams
they
and
really
see how
need to
react. I mean, yes. But I think that opening scene really made me ask that question for the first chunk of this movie. And then eventually it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I don't think that's what's going on. But
can I just say the whole opening scene where Alice is like tipsy on champagne and absolutely looking fabulous in a gorgeous dress. She's like 7 feet tall. She's dancing with this like handsome older European woman. I'm like, to be at a wealthy party Kidman, looking fabulous, drunk on champagne, dancing with the older European woman.
Geneva, if you can dream it, let's manifest it right now.
Manifesting. 2025.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before I close this out here, I just want to say, because we're releasing this, I have to mention this is a Christmas movie.
Yes.
Merry Christmas, everybody. I feel like I have to mention Christmas at some point. So,
well,
Merry
actually,
Christmas.
What are your thoughts on, like, to me, the vibe of this movie and the absolutely incredible lighting choices? So much of it is created by the use of Christmas lights, like practically everywhere you look. Why do you think the decision was made to set this at Christmas? Or, I mean, maybe it's a holdover from the book, but either way, like... What do you think?
I don't think it's from the book, because from the research I remember from the book, I think the book takes place in like the late 1800s or something. And so,
interesting.
As far as I know, they didn't have Christmas lights in the late 1800s.
They did have Christmas.
They did have Christmas, yes. Yes, Christ was born before the 1800s.
Yes. Charles Dickens invented Christmas and
Yes, exactly. I don't know. Quite honestly, I didn't want to think about it too much while watching it. I was like, the lights are pretty. So pretty. There might be something there about, like, it's the most beautiful time of the season. Like, Christmas is this magical time, but actually we all hate it because it's miserable because we're with our families and there's conflict. We pretend like we love Christmas, but actually the underbelly of it, But I don't know. I'm just fishing. I don't actually know.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't really.
My brain hurts.
Yeah, same. I didn't really have an answer to this apart from, like, just the lights do so much for the dream likeness of the atmosphere, Yes. And they almost seem to follow Tom Cruise. Like, everywhere he goes, it's so many Christmas lights.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess maybe just the ironic juxtaposition of, like, this time of, like, wholesome family togetherness versus this marriage that is going through this really delicate and, wrenching time. But
yeah,
I don't know. Whatever it is, whatever the reason, it works.
We like the lights. The lights are pretty.
The lights are pretty.
Okay, so I'm gonna close this out. So this movie on Metacritic has a 69.
That is absolutely insane.
I don't understand why people hate on this movie. Like, it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of Stanley Kubrick's best, but
I will say that I was very young when this came out, so I'm not speaking from firsthand experience, but my understanding of, like, at this time, I could be completely wrong about this, but I feel like I've heard at this time was people were sort of starting to turn a little bit on the idea of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman as a couple. And there may have been some of that, like, parasocial irritation bleeding through in the responses to this movie. Because the whole narrative was, like, they went to Europe for 2 years to film it, and everyone went insane, and then they came back and got divorced, and this movie is what split them up. And so there was sort of like resentment toward it, which I don't think is true.
No.
I'm sure this whole real story was way more complicated and had a much larger time span than that. But,
I mean, she was married to Tom Cruise, so
yeah.
like.
But anyway, all that is to say is I feel like there are other contextual things going on at the time that may have fed into people's reception of this movie that are not the movie's fault.
Yeah, I agree. And I also wonder if maybe like because it was Stanley Kubrick's final film, if people went in with really high expectations of like,
yeah, that's a good question.
You know, this god of cinema, it's his last movie, it's going to be the best thing ever. And, you know, whenever you go into a movie with expectations that high, it's never going to fulfill what you want it to be.
And is this you've seen a lot more Stanley Kubrick stuff than I have. Would you say that this is
movies,
like,
except for Lolita? I won't watch Lolita.
Would you say that this is like, you would see that, like, see the subject matter of this movie and be like, yeah, makes sense for Stanley Kubrick? Or is this a little bit like,
no, this makes sense for Stanley Kubrick?
Okay.
I would say so.
I was going to ask if this is just kind of like people saw this and didn't realize that what they were going to get.
No, I think he deals a lot with like the parts of humanity that people don't want to see or that people don't want to talk about. And I think he does that a lot. And also this movie, he's not afraid of like taking risks and being someone who deals with subject matter that other people wouldn't even touch, you know?
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
It's very Kubrickian to me.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So this movie on Rotten Tomatoes is slightly higher. It's a 76%. Still think it should be higher. I would give this movie like a 98%, but that's fine. Okay. So I have 2 reviews. I kind of struggled to find reviews that I liked for this because a lot of them were just people, I don't know. They didn't seem to really like understand the movie in the same way that I did. But this one comes from Mike Clark at USA Today. And he says, a precisely modulated and mostly mesmerizing 2 3/4 hour suspense movie, in part because it's one of the most bravely disturbing screen works ever attempted about thoughts withheld by even the most devoted marriage partners and the ramifications of voicing them. I think that summarizes this movie very well.
This movie, by the way, random thought that I had while we were talking, make a really interesting double feature with Gone Girl. Gone Girl has that opening and closing with Ben Affleck looking at Rosamund Pike and being like, what is going on inside your head?
If I cracked her skull and unspooled her brains.
Yes, exactly.
Ugh, such a movie. Okay, and then this one comes from Roger Ebert. I mentioned before that he didn't like the ending to this movie and how it tied everything up, but he did seem to enjoy the rest of it. So this is what he says. Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut is like an erotic daydream about chances missed and opportunities avoided. For its hero, who spends 2 nights wandering in the sexual underworld, it's all foreplay. He never actually has sex, but he dances close and holds his hand in the flame. Why does he do this? The easy answer is that his wife made him jealous. Another possibility is that the story she tells inflames his rather torpid imagination. The film has the structure of a thriller, with the possibility that conspiracies and murders have taken place. It also resembles a nightmare. A series of strange characters drift in and out of focus, puzzling the hero with unexpected details of their lives. The reconciliation at the end of the film is the one scene that doesn't work. A film that intrigues us because of its loose ends shouldn't try to tidy up. I like all of that, except for the last sentence.
Yeah. I like his description of it as foreplay.
Yes.
The sexual wandering through the sexual underworld, and it's foreplay. I think that's very well stated.
And then I wanted to read a review that I saw on Letterboxd as well, written by a person named Josh Lewis. And Josh says, a melancholy dream of clinical horniness and the primal sinister forces that linger just beneath the surface of our reality. Fantasy, entitlement, curiosity, repression. Cruise, a ball of confused impulse, slowly wanders Kubrick's thoroughly engrossing dreamscape for 2 hours and 30 minutes, accumulating and burrowing himself deeper into the bizarre details and sexual/violent transgressions of old money. There's no going back from the horrifying knowledge of where that rainbow ends. All you can do is accept its existence and go back to fucking. straight up cackled every time Cruz whips out his medical board card like he's a fucking cop.
Wait, I'm sorry. I missed that. What was the last? Whipped it out as if what?
Hold on. Whipped it out. Straight up cackled every time Cruz whips out his medical board card like he's a fucking cop. So, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I feel like this episode's been pretty long. Yes. But there's a lot to say. It's a great movie.
Long movie, long episode.
Yeah, it is a long movie. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I love this movie. I really like the questions that it poses. I think they're very challenging questions that don't have answers. I think they're very relatable, normal questions that humans ask, but they have very big ramifications on our lives. And what does that mean? And what do we owe our partners? What do we not? What's good, what's bad, if anything. I love this movie. And not to mention, like, we didn't really talk about this that much, but we're not going to bring it up now because whatever. But like the way this movie is shot, the long tracking shots, the way the camera moves is masterful. I mean, it's Stanley Kubrick, so of course it looks great. The lighting is phenomenal. The acting performances, like, this movie is 10 out of 10. I'm sorry. Like, this movie is great. So yeah. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Yeah, I will. I think you said that very well, so I won't attempt to add anything. I will just say that this is one of those movies where every now and then, as I was watching, I had the thought of, if only I knew how to paint, because I would just take a screen grab of this shot right here and paint it. It is so beautifully staged and framed, and the colors and the blocking and everything, like truly every frame a painting.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, that's all I have
a lot of Kubrick's films are, I feel like. Yeah. Okay, Geneva, what are we going to be reviewing next time around?
Well, speaking
another weird dynamic
sexually
of a relationship.
Dysfunctional relationships that have to do are set vaguely around Christmas time. Next week we're covering The Phantom Thread. Not The Phantom Thread, just Phantom Thread. 2017 movie, Paul Thomas Anderson. I have not seen it since you and I watched it together in theaters, and I absolutely adored it. So I am very excited to revisit.
It was very early on in our friendship. Look at us.
That is. Look at us.
So
look
cute.
at us.
So cute. All of these years later, who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
What a dream. If I'd known back then that you and I were going to have a film podcast, I would have been like, oh, this is great. Anyway, okay. I'm very much so looking forward to discussing Phantom Thread. Have a Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope your relationships remain intact. And that was a crazy laugh.
If you ever have, benders where you're going off and exploring and fantasizing about other things and you want to come back together, this movie shows you what you got to do.
Yeah, just don't go places where people are getting killed, please.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpickpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.